Welcome, everyone. My name is Brenda Emmanus, and thank you very much for joining us in what we hope will be a really insightful discussion looking at storytelling in opera. As the creative industry rebuilds itself from the coronavirus and we come to terms with the realities of life post the tragic death of George Floyd, one of the pressing topics seems to be that of representation. Now, in terms of the opera world, one of the most significant challenges seems to be that of the ever-widening gap between a repertoire that's caught between changing times and an audience that is desperately needing to evolve. The issue is increasingly coming to the fore in opera circles as stories presented on stage seem to be more and more removed from our modern realities. Well, today in our discussion, we're going to be exploring storytelling in opera and discuss how the industry can move towards more inclusive representation, and a time and looking at why we tell the stories we tell, how we tell the stories we tell, who performs those stories, and which stories should still be on stage. Well, I'm delighted to say I'm not doing this on my own. I'm joined by an esteemed panel, which I'd like to introduce you to now, starting with Peter Brathwaite, who's a baritone, tenor and artistic advisor from the Opera Philadelphia, Lawrence Brownlee, Rachel Caccia, who's the producer at the Royal Opera House, and Wabriya King, who's a drama therapist. Thank you all for joining us. Peter, if I could start with you, because this is a subject that's really close to your heart and you've been thinking about it for a very long time. What is it that's motivated your interest?
I think for me, art is one of the most powerful tools in the fight against not just anti-Black racism, but all forms of discrimination. And in spite of a continued lack of representation in the opera world, I am convinced and invested in the idea that this art form has the potential to be one of the strongest antidotes to prejudice. Essentially, this is a question of the nature and function of our art form in society. And music and theatre united, opera, in its glorious, richest form, is storytelling. And the stories we choose to tell and how we tell them reflect who we are, who we want to be, and where we're going. And it's crucial that we remain vigilant to the fact that the stories we tell and how we tell them have the potential to either normalize racial prejudice or mitigate it.
Now, we've heard the argument about representation throughout, littered throughout the arts for a very long time. We've heard it in film, we've heard it in theatre. More and more we're hearing in classical music and opera, and it seems particularly difficult for classical music and opera for obvious reasons. So where do you think we are now?
I think after the tragic events of last year, we're at an urgent and necessary reassessment point. And it's a time to truly reform opera's culture, the mindset, and to place anti-racism front and center as the industry rebuilds itself. And there's a certain level of engagement with anti-racist action, but in too many cases, we are slow to act as an industry.
Do you think classical music and opera in particular are slower than most?
I'd say so, and there are various things that play there. It takes a long time to put an opera together. There are so many people involved, and the act of commissioning new work is a lengthy process. But I think what would be great if we saw more of an outward commitment to this work and to be on the front foot about really committing to action and working out what that action looks like.
Lawrence, you're a testament to how successful people of colour can be in this industry. Thank you very much for joining us. I know it's a very busy time for you, but you've been doing some great work at Opera Philadelphia. Can I get you to kind of expand and enlighten us on what success looks like in your eyes and how you've managed to achieve what you have over at Opera Philadelphia?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and nice to be with all of you today. For me, working at Opera Philadelphia, I've worked with the general director, and my primary focus has been to do a number of things, to be a liaison for artists and administration, but also to be an advocate for new works and to also to increase diversity in the audience and also in the staff. And so that's the things that I've been hard at work being engaged in conversation with not only the audience there, but also the board and sponsors and various peoples, because it takes an army to put this art form together that we love so much. And so it's a job that I'm passionate about. We have to reinvent what the opera audience is. We have to expand it. I know people are saying universally that this is an art form that is somewhat dying. I don't agree, but what we have to do is to make sure, as Peter said, to make it more inclusive, to bring more people under the tent of what it is we do in opera. And so I'm happy to be operating in that capacity, and it's something, as I said before, I'm very passionate about.
Can I ask you a more personal question? What is it about opera that attracted you to it? Because on the surface, it is a white domain. What made you want to go into this field?
Well, the interesting thing is sometimes people will say, or I've heard this said, that sometimes your profession chooses you. And I was already involved in music and church. My background is gospel, but I had a teacher in school who told me that I had a voice that was suitable for classical music. And I hadn't been surrounded by classical music or exposed to it. And when I first got a chance, an opportunity to see what it really was, I fell in love with it immediately. And again, as I said, my background was gospel, and I love hip hop and R&B and rap and jazz and all those things too. But if you love those things, it doesn't mean you don't have to like opera, and you can't like opera. And so I appreciated the art form. I was inspired by the Three Tenors concert that I heard when I was graduating from high school. And someone said, hey, you have a voice similar to those guys. Maybe you should pursue opera. And I fell in love with it. So that was the thing. It was a natural kind of gravitation towards the art form, but hearing people at the highest level. And again, someone telling me that I had the voice for it, it made me more curious about pursuing a career in opera. And then when I saw it for all it is, I fell in love with it immediately.
Now, you clearly are an inspiration to many. How did you navigate the challenges, and what would you say that the prior or major challenges were for you?
Well, obviously, I'm a black man, an African American, as we say, in the States. I'm not very tall either. I think I'm about 1 meter, 165. I don't, so that's not real tall. And so, people told me that I probably wouldn't have any success, first because I'm black, but also because I'm not tall. But the thing that I have always used to energize what I do, or just to give myself the confidence, is to believe in the fact that I have a gift that people want to hear, and I was put on earth to do something. And so with all of the challenges and all of the difficulties that came my way, I just felt like I had something that I could focus on to present that, always work on perfecting my craft, and let that be the thing that goes past all of the obstacles. So the things that I had to navigate, the racism, not being hired for this, not being put in this cast because it doesn't go well with this beautiful blonde soprano, all of those things are secondary to the voice. And so the voice has been the thing that I've tried to focus on to make sure that the doors could be open for me.
Now, you've got Opera Philadelphia to commission new works. What do you see as the long-term impact of this?
New works are great. Incidentally, I'm in New York City right now, and tonight I'm going to see Fire Shut Up in My Bones at the Metropolitan Opera that everyone's raving about. So I have the great pleasure to see that, and it's been a huge success. I think some opera aficionados will think, oh, I want to hear just Traviata or Aida or Marriage of Figaro all the time, but new works are so important. Renee Fleming is a good friend of mine, and she said, the way that we make sure that this art form continues is to create new works. The people of this time have something to say and should be able to add to the canon of music. So I think with the success of Fire Shut Up in My Bones, people hopefully will look at this and say more new works need to be on the major stages of the world because they are, in fact, appreciated.
I'm sure we'll come back to discussing that when we talk about solutions later down the line. Wabriya, you've heard about Lawrence's extraordinary success here. He's managed to, talk to the board, to have get new works commissioned. But how easy is it for Black performers and practitioners to speak truth, to talk truth to power, as it were?
I think it's getting easier. My background, I trained as an actor before becoming a drama therapist and working alongside productions. And actually, as a child, I sang classically as well, and I think much like Lawrence, it was the idea that somebody kind of my year 6 production. So year 6 is like I was 10, 10, and we did Pirates of Penzance, and I had like a solo, and someone was like, "Oh, my friends, like dad was like, you're really good," and like so he said, "Come into this children's choir, this classical children's choir," which I did in North London, and I did that until I was about 20, and it kind of meant that because of that I was in these places, and I think it's changed so much even from what I see now. And then when I graduated from Oxford Drama School in 2012, when I think about what was available to me as a Black actress, and now the spaces that I'm in as a therapist supporting other global majority performers, actors, it's changed, and I think it's got a real it's picked up a pace, like and I welcome it, but I suppose I acknowledge that with every with this pace comes also this kind of acknowledgement that there will be people that will feel disgruntled maybe about that, but I think, you know, again, that's as a point, it's the talent. I think I always use that, audiences didn't really flinch when like Laurence Olivier like played Othello, right? He just did it. It was just done. And I think that it should be the same, that all of these pieces of work, these amazing pieces of music, should be able to be sung or performed by anybody. And it will be the voice, the talent that we are focused on. We're already in, theatre and with opera, we're in a realm of like pushing the boundary of reality. So, well, then we should play with that. Why should there be some form of racial construct or confinement to that? Yeah.
Rachel, we sometimes hear the argument in opera that what matters is the talent. It's the talent that's taken on board, and it's the talent that's promoted. It's nothing to do with colour. Do you buy that?
Not really anymore. No, I don't think it's we're not at equality yet. It's that equity equality argument where it's not a level playing field yet, and therefore we need to work harder to provide a level of opportunity for people of colour, Black artists, getting into the building. We do a lot of work with our young artist program on that, but we've got a long way to go. We know that the predominant number of people that work in this building are white, and it's we're really aware of it. We're doing a lot, but we've got a long way to go. I think obviously it's all about talent, it's all about the voice, but we need to work hard. We can't rest back on that and say we need to wait for this talent to suddenly appear. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on the talent pipelines, and as you've all said, it takes time, but the work is there. I feel like there has been a real shift in genuine commitment. It has been pushed by the Black Lives Matter movement, and kind of during the pandemic, I've certainly felt like there has been a shift in the sector, but I think there's a challenge in finding resource to match that commitment post COVID as well. I hate to bring up the pandemic word, but it's a kind of tension between the drive to get the work on the stage, quite rightly, with these artists, and the resource and the radical duty of care needed to support these underrepresented artists properly through a creation process. So
and of the initiatives that you are doing, what gives you hope? What do you see as the sort of the light at the end of the tunnel?
Oh, that's a good question. A lot. We're doing, as I said, our young artists program is a real beacon of shining light in this. They're really they're finding that talent internationally, bringing it to our stage. I would also say we've done a lot of work with the organisation Tonic Theatre, actually, which has been incredibly positive, and they've played quite a major role in forcing arts organisations, not just us, but many others, to kind of think about how they operate, how we can diversify kind of both the workforce and the work happening on the stage. And we've gained a huge amount from that, actually, with our relationship with Tonic. So the work is happening. I do feel positive.
So Peter, what's been your experience? Have you come across any initiatives here in the UK? I mean, Lawrence was talking about some amazing work that's been done at Opera Philadelphia. What has been the things that you've seen that's made you think, perhaps maybe?
Yeah, I'd say that there are some really brilliant education projects, getting young people through the doors and getting them into performances. But I'd like to see that translate into, as we say, main stage productions, and so that they're coming along and seeing themselves represented on stage. It's not just there are a few diverse artists going into the schools and going into the community, but then by the time they arrive to see a show, it's a very different story. But I'd say that in theatre, I went to see Nine Night that was put on by the National Theatre, and that was Natasha Gordon's 2018 play, and it's a family drama set over the course of a traditional Jamaican nine-night wake observed by a West Indian family living in Britain. And it includes older characters from the Windrush generation, and they're not necessarily talking about their experience of being Black, but their lives are represented on stage. And the fact that their stories were being amplified felt hugely significant, and it was almost celebratory in fact. And it was one of the few times I've sat in a theatre auditorium and been in the majority, and that's hugely exciting to see what is bringing people through the doors.
There's an interesting quote from tenor Russell Thomas, and he says, if you want the art form to survive, you have to make it look like your community, the community that houses it. I wonder what your response is to that, Lawrence.
I absolutely agree with that. You need to be serving the public that is in your city. So if you think of a city like New York, they need to be putting on productions that are not necessarily thematically geared towards anyone, but the stage needs to look like what you walk out the door and see. You see a cultural melting pot, you see people from all walks of life, and I think that should be represented on stage. Opera is about telling human stories, and it doesn't have to be just one race or one demographic to tell the story. It can be told by what you see. And so I think it is incumbent, it is really important for any institution, artistic institution, to serve that whole public that is that the city they operate in. So I absolutely agree with it, and I think it's important to make sure not only the people that are on the stage, but the people in the administration have that same type of representation. Because I think even when you come to the table programming and trying to even market some of the productions, you need to have different viewpoints to how you market. You market to East London differently than you market to Knightsbridge or something. I mean, it's that type of thing. You have to have the thinking to make sure that it is appealing to other people and to know that they are invited this way. This type of thinking that is inclusive and really considering everyone is really important. So I agree with that. Serve the community, but have it be served by a diverse group of people within the institution.
Wabriya, do you think that that's a challenge in itself, getting the communities to think this is for them, when all they're seeing is La Traviata or something that they feel a natural disconnect with? Is there work to be done there?
Yes, I'm going to name that I'm a bit biased, because from about the age of 4, I was going to the ballet every year, and then into like going to the opera. So I think
is that because of your parents? How did that happen?
Yeah, it was because my mum was really, I wanted to be a ballerina, and therefore we went to, a Christmas treat was to go to the ballet every year. And then once I started to sing and I was doing the proms and doing things like that, well, then we expanded that and I went to the opera as well. And I do remember thinking, even as an 11, 12, 10-year-old, like, oh my gosh, I sing like these people, but no one here looks like me. And feeling a bit like an imposter with my mum, and I kind of sat there and feeling the pressure to look like I understood, even though I knew I did in my 10-year-old, like I had a grasp on it all and was singing things like Mahler and doing and was aware of all of these works, but having to feel like I had to show that I was aware, kind of thing. But I do, so I'm going to say that I'm biased because I think there is a beauty in them. I think there is a skill in these works. But I do think if they were better represented, and actually when I think about the schools, like bringing them to schools, well, what age group? When do we say it's okay for people to go to the opera? I think the younger you go, I think younger children have a way better, they're like sponges and they absorb and take things in. So if we're suggesting to a 7-year-old, let's come and look at this like La Traviata, but you've condensed it down to something more manageable. But they're getting to hear that and feel the talent and what it takes to sing those things. I think that's amazing, because the history is important, the technique is important, and then that will maybe inspire them to then go and see all these other things or want to sing like that. I just think discrediting some of the old work, not discrediting, but I think it has a place still. I just think who is performing it is the question. Personally, and what does the setup look like? What does the stage look like? A bit like what Lawrence was saying, you could go and see La Boheme, but walk in and see everybody like maybe look dressed like you and depicted, and like you're going to be intrigued. You're going to want to hear what they're saying, regardless of how they're saying it, right? I think, yeah.
Rachel, for you, hearing that as a producer, you must have that constant pressure in your ear. How do we reflect society that we live in? How do we reflect the society? Are you doing as much engagement in terms of going out as you are trying to get people to come in?
Yeah, we are. I was going to say, just on what Wabriya was just talking about, it feels it's also really important to think about creative teams in that context and who's coming up with these concepts for these productions of the of the old work and the new work. And it feels like it's about plurality of thought, really, and like knowing that kind of any piece of music, theatre, art, stronger when you have multiplicity of voice and experience. And that actually is, that's about who's on stage. It's also about who's creating the work behind the scenes, backstage. And as Lawrence said, I think that stretches into the administrative staff. But yeah, I mean, it's completely forgotten your question, Brenda. But
it's about engagement. Whether you go out. The challenge of having to go out as well as invite people in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a challenge. It's an effort we have to be making. There are efforts being made, absolutely. But as we know, kind of the music education system isn't working particularly well under our government. It feels like it's not that supported. So it's, arts institutions are in a bit of a tricky position in that sense, trying to go out and create these talent pipelines when it feels like, the schools are under a lot of pressure and therefore universities, conservatoires. But yeah, there's definitely effort being made to go out and find that talent. And artists, and as I said, parts of creative teams, going out to see directors doing work that isn't maybe opera, but maybe a Black artist who's working predominantly in theatre, and we look at what maybe they can be doing for us and how they might, turn an opera around and think of it, put it on, turn it on its head. That we've seen some brilliant examples of that recently, and we're going out and finding those people where we can, for sure.
So Peter, from the insights that you've just heard, in terms of the canon, do you think it's a case then of reframing or recontextualizing it, or do you just take new work and to younger audiences? What do you see as the way forward?
No, I completely agree with what Wabriya was saying about the value of the canon. And I always think of what Titus Kaffar, the visual artist, says about this. He says it's about looking again and making new representations so that we don't keep excluding ourselves. And I think that's what's at the heart of it. It's reframing and making it mean something to all of us. And this is about humanity and not just one part of humanity. It's about all of us being in this together and being able to appreciate it and love it in the same way.
So, but in what ways then do you think we need to revive these historic pieces?
Well, I think it's, as Rachel was saying, it's about creative teams. It's having different voices making the work and different perspectives. It's not just having an all-white creative team putting on a show with Black artists. It's more than that. We have to do a bit more work in who we find to create these teams, and I'd say that's how we move forwards together in allyship, and I know that that is something that is hugely important. It's allyship behind the scenes, on stage, and with the audiences as well. It's the conversations we have with the audiences and what we demand of them as well, and the self-education. And opera is a challenging art form to digest at times, and we have to do a bit of work to be able to fully appreciate everything that is offered on stage. And I think anti-racist action is part of that as well.
Lawrence, do you want to pick up on that? I mean, how do you feel about whether we get young people to appreciate the historic canon, or that we just feed it to them a different way? And how do we engage these communities? Because there's this divide between the audiences and the performers.
Well, it's interesting because I think that the works themselves are so meaningful and so important. And I've seen them be effective to people who never thought that they would like opera. We're telling human stories. I remember doing the show La Favorite in a few years ago, and I invited a group of underprivileged African-American students to come see the opera for the first time. They didn't know what they were seeing. They didn't know what opera was, but they came to the show, and then afterwards they came to speak to me. They were so mesmerized by what they saw on stage. And these are people who listened to, Jay-Z and Beyonce and all the popular artists, but they also were drawn in by the stories that compelled them, that tugged on their heartstrings, and they had so many questions. And so it is meaningful. We can produce the canon and put it on stage. But I think when you see Larry as playing Fernand, which doesn't necessarily have to be a certain race, he just happens to be Black. It was important to them to see someone that they could relate to and say, okay, I get the story because it looks like what I know as far as like everyday life. And so I think it's important to do that. New works are important, and drawing people in, telling the stories of today, I think are also important. And so collectively doing the old and the new and being, again, talking about this idea of inclusivity is the way that we can draw people in, but the work itself pull people in. Everyone's not an opera lover, everyone's not a jazz lover, but there are a lot of people who never thought that they would love opera, would like it if they were just exposed to it properly. So I really believe in the power of the canon and the work, and I believe that we can draw people in by just telling the good story in a way that is meaningful to them, meaning showing the diversity and inclusion.
I mean, it obviously it's going to take work from top down, bottom up, from working with communities to the board, which you've mentioned. How do we deal with the resistance? What do you think is the fear? What are people scared of?
I think people think in some way that opera's not cool, or they think that's just for a certain type of people, a certain class of people, a certain race sometimes of people. But the thing I've been doing, I've been producing a few shows called Lawrence Brownlee and Friends. And what we do is we start with opera, and then we do a little bit of popular song, and then we do some gospel and some other things to show people that it's not such a long journey from the music of Haydn to the music of Kirk Franklin or the music of some of these other composers. And so when people can see that the same voice can do this discipline and that, and appreciate it, people will say it's not as off-putting or intimidating as I once thought it was. And just to bring it down, we don't have to dumb it down, but serve it on a platter to them so they can really take it in and digest it. So that's one of the ways I think we can do, providing them this opportunity, an easy entree into it. So maybe not going to Parsifal, which is 6 hours long, the first opera experience, but something that they feel like they can have, they say, okay, oh my gosh, I didn't know, I was absolutely blown away by what was on stage. And there are ways to do it, like some of these concerts and some of these, I think, new age opera that, also takes elements from different styles like jazz and blues and put that on the stage. And I think you will bring people to the opera because of their love for those other disciplines.
Now, the resistance isn't just from communities thinking this is not for me, it's from the top down. What about the those in leadership that think, look, these historical canons are what people pay to see. These are great works of art. This is amazing music. We are not changing it. If they don't like it, move on. How do you deal with that sort of resistance? I mean, I've been quite crude in my explanation of it, but there is surely resistance at the top.
You know, and especially because in the United States, I have to say, where a lot of our money is privately funded, our institutions are privately funded. So the people with the deep pockets, they want to hear the Bohèmes, the Traviatas, the Butterflies all the time. And they will give their money to their institutions to make sure that this is performed all the time. But what I'm doing now, in the trenches fighting for, is just to let them know that yes, let's keep the canon, but let's expand and let's create meaningful pieces of work that are worthy, that people can identify with. And it doesn't take away the Aidas, it doesn't take away the Manon, it doesn't take away these other things, but showing them the value in it and making sure that they also realize that we must expand our audiences. You know, most of the times you go in the theater and we call it the sea of foam. It's a bunch of people with white hair. And we need to make sure that changes, that we can have people, you know, from every age group that comes and appreciates it. And they themselves will see the value in something that's new, something that's compelling, something that's talking about something that happened in their city like 30 years ago, not 200 years ago. I think that we can, as long as we show them that it is important to expand our audience and expand what opera is, I think then, not putting away the important things, I think that they should, hopefully will come in and want to see this art form survive.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. That's a really insightful thought there. Wabriya, in terms of the new works and introducing these new works, there's obviously that has to be done with some care. What are the things that you think need to be considered when that's being done in terms of the duty of care of the performers, especially if they are being presented in front of a sea of foam? I love that term. What do you think needs to be, as a drama therapist, to be mindful of?
Yeah, I think it's a term that I use a lot, and it's this idea, I suppose, it's white lash, this idea that like we're not being represented because it being slightly different to the mass representation that one is used to, that the privilege affords, and as a result of that will be that performers will kind of hear it, and it may not be aggressive, right? And I think it can be completely micro, like, oh, it's wonderful that we can do such things so that everybody's included. And I think, Lawrence, you mentioned that a little bit about bringing people to the opera, not necessarily dumbing it down, right? Because I think that's so important. It's saying that I think it's allowing audiences to say, like, look, yes, we're doing new work, but that doesn't mean it's not good. It's just different. So yes, for every three canons that you see in a season, we're going to give you something else, and it won't just be in that something else where you happen to see people that are not white. Like it will be all the time. And I think, I might be upsetting people in the audience, but I recently went to see the new James Bond film. And like, I will very openly say I'm 100% behind Idris Elba being the new James Bond. Sorry, I just think he'd look great. And and by the end of the film, spoiler, I was like, oh, where's Bond? What's happening here? What's happening here? And I kind of came away with this idea of, if Bond goes and then a new Bond is either not the norm that we know, well, then they're not James Bond. And the argument was to have someone to be James Bond that was different. Does that make sense? Not the 007. And so I hope I haven't upset loads of people. Apologies. But it's that idea that actually we want to bring culture and diversity to the James Bond, not just like take away James Bond and just leave this 007 and that could be anybody. That it's that.
But I've been in the same breath. I've been to dinner parties discussing James Bond and whether Idris should be the James Bond. And one of the other counter arguments was that, well, no, let Bond be blonde or brunette or whatever. Why can't Idris be Spring a Bell, or why can't it just be Luther, or why can't we have other characters or other stories that are all more authentic and representative? There's nothing wrong with having a James Bond, but there's also room for other stories. Surely that's another argument to...
Absolutely. And I suppose there's others, absolutely. But when I think about growing up as a child and how these main idols or people like, that we want to be, or that people are put on a platform, if they all look the same, let's take James Bond, to be a spy, to be whatever, to be cool, to be the main spy. Well, you're James Bond, and what does James Bond look like? Or to be, even when I was thinking about like being a singer, to be a soprano, well, what do they look like? Did they look like me? No, but I went away and like my teacher showed me like, no, like they can look like you. They do like it. So it's, and I didn't do it. I chose to be an actor, but like, and now I'm a therapist. But I think it's that idea that actually, if we can inspire one 7-year-old to be like, I can be James Bond, even though I'm from I'm from the global majority, and we can inspire another 7-year-old to go, oh, I can sing like that. I think, because you'd be hard pushed to meet a child under 10 that wouldn't give that a go. Because they are not held or constrained by that at that age by what I can do, what I can't. They just give it a go. So if we're offering this as part of what they do, they're going to give it a go. And if they're good and they enjoy it, well, then maybe they can pursue it. And that's where hopefully our government will be better about supporting that and take the elitism out of that. And all of a sudden we've got 8-7-year-olds that they were just like, yeah, we just watched this thing, and now they're producers, maybe in E&O, or maybe they are sopranos or tenors or what have you. So I think for me, it really is about holding the canon but just opening the door.
I'm going to ask this to Peter, but Lawrence, you may want to come in on this. The reality is, if we're moving more and more towards our ambition of a more inclusive culture, there will be times when somebody's has been or will be the first or is the new, and they're put in almost a very vulnerable position here, an exciting position for those of us of people of color watching, thinking, oh my God, look what we've got now, and a black James Bond, for example. Now we're on the Bond tip, but there is a vulnerability there is this open to criticism that they're suddenly it feels for me so exposed that you want to protect it. The only memory I have as a child, for example, that when I first had a black teacher, I was like, oh my God, I've got a black teacher. And I was really excited. But as a little girl, I remember he was sitting on a bench at lunchtime eating a banana. And I ran up to him and said, don't do that, don't do that. And he didn't have a clue. I didn't want anyone to see him as a monkey or assume. And it's really warped and silly, but I got so protective of him. And we sometimes feel that about our stars or our breakthrough stars. Lawrence, did you feel any vulnerability of that experience? And Peter, what's your thinking in terms of the duty of care or how we manage those situations, which are exciting and which are breakthrough, but also leave people quite exposed and vulnerable?
It's interesting because I remember early on, people were telling me that I wouldn't have success because I was a black man. But I remember someone who wasn't black told me, don't think about your blackness, be good. Be good, be exceptional, be the thing that got you on that stage in the first place. And so people will see beyond the fact that you're the first. And yes, some people may comment on it and say that, oh, there's a black man playing this. And I remember one time I got a review, someone says, I noticed that he was a black man from the beginning of the show, and then I forgot about it. And so it was the talent that I tried to put at the forefront that people would focus on that. Yeah, there are going to be people that obsess over it, and there's the criticism that comes with it. And he didn't do it just like this person who's always been European, white person. And so your best strengths that got you in that place are the things you should lead with. And then we get a chance to rewrite the script. We get a chance to make it be something that has never been before. It can be that spice that has never been a certain way before. I always feel like I always want to promote my strengths, what I'm good at. And so that's the thing, that if the criticism comes is because people aren't used to what they're seeing, but we're getting the chance to change the discourse and change the conversation. And so actually this character can be this way because I saw it be done effectively by this person who I never thought could be it. And their mind is blown and the audience is thinking, oh my gosh, it was never that way before. But just allowing that person that space to be the most authentic character or performer they can be. I think that that's the way that we can change this. And so the criticism will fall flat because you will get, if you do your job, an exceptional performance.
Peter, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's easy to fixate on being black. And there's a Leontyne Price interview where she says, I never thought of this as a negative. It was a positive for me, and I think having experienced comments such as, when you opened your mouth, I assumed you were a white person blacked up. And yeah, that was a low point, but actually moving beyond that to actually doing my job and yeah, doing that effectively is what drives us forwards. And yeah, the love of the art form and the desire to tell these stories, and yeah, telling them from a human point of view, but also from a point of difference, and accepting I have a different perspective, and we all do. And that adds something and can only make the art form richer in the end.
Yeah, and sorry to jump in, Peter.
No, go ahead.
And I think that's what I mean about the micro of that, and with the artist, and it's that you kind of have to, that they would have to face, is those that comes from an audience of a sea of foam, where there isn't enough practice of what you can say, those, and that comes with it. And I think my work would be to kind of support the strength in self, to hold a space where an artist could come and go, this happened and it made me feel like this. But my work would be, okay, but don't you banish yourself from that room, because actually it's your talent and you are allowed in that room.
But that must be so hard to consistently have to pick yourself up from that.
Absolutely. But I suppose I want to say, I think we've been doing it for years. I think we are consistently picking ourselves up. I think we do it from a very young age. I think people from the African diaspora, from the global majority, we are picking ourselves up even before we know we are picking ourselves up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I watch small children defend themselves, but they do it in a very blatant way and go, no, because that's just that. Whereas we know all the nuances, and then and understanding that, and so we are picking ourselves up. But if we pick ourselves up knowing that we are enough, not picking ourselves up thinking that we are less than. I watched a play the other day, and there was a line in it that says, and the character said, there are laws in place to keep us as Black people, to keep us equal. Now, surely if we weren't just equal, there would be no laws. And I was like, oh, that's a line. I've paraphrased, but that's the essence of it. That until there doesn't need to be any laws. And there are audiences that just come in and go, oh, it's whoever, and they just look, and that's whoever it is. We have to keep picking ourselves up and doing it consciously, but making our care of ourselves vigorous, and that is my job, to go, no, come on, you are enough, and let's get you back on stage to work.
So Peter, sorry, were you going to say something, Lauren?
What Bria said is it's right on. We are used to being the other. We grow up knowing we're the other. I remember reading a book recently, and the writer, who was a Caucasian writer, she said, if you think about a doctor, if I tell you to imagine a doctor, it's always going to be a white one. If I tell you to imagine a teacher, it's always going to be a white one. If I tell you to imagine a lawyer, it's always going to be a white one. We are always the other. We go into the dentist's office, we're the other. We're going into a place that's more uncomfortable for us, and we have to be comfortable in it. And so we know that from an early age, and sometimes our parents don't have to say it. Yes, our parents may have that conversation with you, that you are different, and you have to be proud of your Blackness, be proud of your heritage. But often, I don't know that conversation is told on the other side. I think sometimes people may say, be thankful the way you are, and you are given something from birth that other people don't have, so don't take that for granted. So I think that's a conversation that is had amongst other groups of people. And so Yes, the pride in self, the self-worth, and knowing that what you're giving is worthy to be seen and heard is very, very important for a Black performer. And it's something that I always tell, even with my own kids and other young people that I talk to, I tell them that you never have to apologize. And this apologist mentality is absolutely something that you should abandon as soon as you can, because your worthiness in who you are was from birth, and you don't need to prove yourself to anyone.
So Rachel, judging from what we're hearing, it does feel like the work in changing the narrative and you know, being aware of our versions of storytelling, we have as much work to do with the audiences and critics as we do with the performers and the board and people behind the scenes.
Absolutely, yeah, I think that was so beautifully put. It was it's just reminded me of this. I've been thinking of this like what this idea of radical duty of care means in terms of, as you know, as a building, as producers, as white people, like what we need to be supporting artists to make their best work, and we need to be acknowledging that like the journey of a person of color coming into our building will probably look very different to a white person, you know, how the white person got into the building, and how do we as producing venues kind of support that artist when they're with us to make sure they're making their best work. And that's something we've been thinking about a lot. It's something we've got a lot of work to do on, and but yeah, as you say, and then our responsibility as a building to, you know, reflect that in audiences and critics. As you say, it's a journey, but yeah, there is work being done.
There's a question that's coming, and maybe you could start off the answer. One of them being, is from Jordan Thomas: why aren't there programs for directors, composers, librettists, or behind the scenes positions in opera houses like there are for young artist programs? And it could be interesting to talk to us whether there are particular focus on developing diverse talent.
Good question. There are some that I know of, actually. They're growing ever fast. I don't want to toot the Opera House horn too much. I'll try. There are many others or other organisations, but we've got, as I mentioned before, we've got our Yetta Parker Young Artist Programme that does a lot, which is actually not just for singers, but they do a lot for directors. They're doing some librettist schemes and some composer schemes. They've been doing some brilliant commissioning opportunities for those people with a particular focus on women and people of colour, so looking at underrepresented groups in the industry. We also run the Engender programme, which myself and my colleague Kate kind of co-pilot, which has been running for about 3 years now, and that provides opportunity as a kind of opportunities and platform to celebrate and advocate for women working in opera, but with a real focus to look at how we can diversify that pool of women working in this field. So we do quite a lot of kind of R&D and commissioning work out of that network. But there's also, there is the New Directions programme that Music Theatre Wales have just kind of launched their first new pieces with Elise Ishmael, which is brilliant. There was the Britton Pears Jerwood programme, which is Britton Pears Arts have run for quite a few years. So yeah, there is work. Obviously, I think a lot of focus can be on the young artist programmes for singers, as this person's said in their question, but I think there has been a real drive to try and expand the creative teams and diversify those pools of talent. And
I mean, that argument is also runs. I mean, there are loads of like young artist schemes or apprentice schemes, etc., going on. But when you're a performer, a seasoned performer, what can we do for those that are sort of lower down in their years and have much more experience to sustain them in the industry, to give them opportunities?
You mean people who are kind of further in their career? So they don't fit the category of the young artist, you mean?
The entry level always seems to be the answer in a lot of these situations.
I think these the kind of where the R&D fits in that is, it's not so kind of age specific, I guess. I mean, the thing with singing training is that, you know, it does happen at a certain period of your life, as these, you know, Peter and Lawrence know very well. It's I'm Wabriya, actually trained as a singer. It's quite a kind of linear pathway, isn't it, in terms of how you train and what you need to do and the targets you need to hit through that. And so it feels like opportunities for kind of research development projects, and that is, you know, across creative teams and singers. It feels like we can be giving opportunities to singers who perhaps aren't working on our main stage yet. And actually, you know, the work that we do in the Limbury Theatre, which is what I'm producer for, again with my colleague Kate, we really look at how we can give opportunity for artists who maybe aren't at that main stage level. They haven't reached that point in their career, but it's this like mid-scale, you know, really high quality platform for both new work and repertoire. So yeah, I'd say there's some opportunity there.
Thank you. There's another question that's coming from Laura Piccioni. Excuse me if I pronounced your name wrong. With COVID-19, we've seen a lot of increase in virtual performances, many that are cheaper or more accessible. Do you see this as helping to expand opera to new groups, or will it hurt the art form? Peter, would you like to take that one?
I've just been involved in a new production that was streamed live in Brussels, and that was a new opera, new story, based on a novel by Richard Powers about a mixed race family growing up in segregated America, the time of our singing. And that was streamed, and seeing that reach audiences, quite possibly who wouldn't necessarily watch opera, because this opera had elements of jazz as well as early music, Purcell, Bach, combined together to tell this story. And just observing the comments and seeing people from across the world tune into this is hugely exciting for the art form. And you see that, yeah, streaming has such a power, and I've loved that over the course of this past year, so much has been available, and I think it's a really fruitful thing.
And Lawrence, as someone who's been doing such great work in the States, and we hear what the tremendous work that Peter's doing here, do you think artist-led projects have a vital part to play in terms of our progress here?
Yeah, I think so. And some of the things I've been called to do have been to curate things that have been passion projects for me, where I have relationships with some of the theaters where I would say, what about this? Obviously, working at Opera Philadelphia as an advisor, I get a chance to talk to the artistic department. They want to realize the things that I would like to produce there, and so they've been helpful in that. So I think it is important for artist-led things to do, to be seen as valuable, because something I'm passionate about, I'll put my whole heart in, and I think that people will be able to see that I am doing this with a sense for it to be effective. But just to tag on to something that Peter said, to answer the question about these online things, whether they help or not, I think they do help. Some of the data from what they've seen at Opera Philadelphia is that many of the people probably are new opera listeners, people who had never been exposed to it before. And I think it is absolutely helpful. Now, I personally believe that nothing beats coming into the live theater. But the second best thing is to be able to watch it at home and get a chance to experience. And what I hope it will do is whet the appetite of people who may have never gone into an opera house before, for whatever reason they wouldn't do it, for them to say, you know what, I had that experience and now I want to go see it up close and personal. So I think it is absolutely helpful, and I think it can complement the people that will go into the theater ultimately. I hope that that's what happens.
That seems to have done really well for Hamilton, for example, on Disney Plus, and a number of young people I know that now want to actually physically go and see it. It's been amazing.
Absolutely. And I think there's that idea of ownership as well, like latching on to what Lawrence just said, this idea, like if you feel maybe excluded from an opera house, or you didn't even know that one existed, or, that was just for certain types of people, but then you can go online and you sit and you experience it, it gives you a sense of ownership.
Yeah.
It's actually, if you then go, oh, I actually really like that, maybe it'd be cool to see that live. Right. And then you go in and it's just that nugget, like that breadcrumb that goes, oh, actually, no, I do belong here because I actually know this. And I can just imagine young people being like, no, we know this, we watch this. Remember this bit? But now coming in and feeling like they belong in that audience because they have been of that audience. So I think, and I also think it's just to do with just affordability as well. Mm-hmm. Like it's expensive, and I grew up in a middle class household, and it's still a treat. It wasn't something that could be done all the time. And I think if it's online and it's a third of the price, well, maybe it can be done 2-3 times a year, or what have you. Yeah.
I'm mindful of the time, and we have about 5 or so 10 minutes to talk about solutions. Usually when it comes to inclusion, one of the big words that's often seen as the solution is that of targets. So I want to propose to you about whether targets is a good thing in terms of staff and talent, but also in terms of repertoire? Should there only be a certain amount of historic repertoire put on it and making room for new works? How do you think we move this forward and with targets? Peter?
It's yeah, Lawrence, what do you think about this?
It's that dirty word giving the tea.
It's a difficult thing because being a part of the administration at Opera Philadelphia, I understand that new works are expensive. They've never been produced before. You have to get new costumes, new stage scenery. You need to get everything is new. And in order to be able to produce things, the price tag for that oftentimes is harder. It's more difficult. I mean, it's higher rather. And so to be able to produce some of the things, the great war horses, if you will call them, Carmen, people who are sometimes those uninvested opera or classical, lovers, they don't go to everything, but they'll go to a Carmen. They don't go to everything, but they'll go to some of these other more recognizable things. The same thing is true with theater, A Midsummer Night's Dream, or some of these other. They go to these things, but you have to do some of those. There can be a mixture that when you have these cash cows, as we call them sometimes, these things that bring in money that allow you later on to be able to produce other things, more meaningful things, sometimes perhaps on a smaller scale, because that's also okay. That doesn't make it any less meaningful. I think it's good to be able to combine them and to show them that's what the art form can be. It can be a mix of the old and new. So I think the target should be bringing a diverse programming, not just diverse in like racial makeup and anything, but just diversity and scale sometimes is a good way to mix things up and make people more interested.
Wabriya, do you have a thought on that?
No, I completely agree. Because actually I think, and I'm glad someone brought Shakespeare in. Maybe I should have as the trained actor, but it's that idea of, we haven't got rid of Shakespeare yet, so why should we get rid of the canon? And I think having a mix of those things, and also allowing for, just as you see with different adaptations and performances, productions of Shakespeare, the Globe at the moment have got a Romeo and Juliet at the moment that it's coming to the end, but it's very modern in its approach, and it's high, and I think that it's still Romeo and Juliet though, and it's still getting audiences in that are maybe different, but also the ones that would come because it's Romeo and Juliet, right? And then they get in and they're like, this is not too late. But I think that's a good thing, because then you'll have always like a polarity of audience members in the one space, all taking ownership for different reasons. And I think my sense is that the survival, if that's what if we're at that stage now, the survival of the canon is giving it a new sense of ownership. It was popular at the time it was written. It wasn't elitist, it was popular. That was the music that was written at the time. Let's make it popular again. That doesn't mean change it. It just means let's give everybody a sense of ownership.
So thoughtful staging.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that education plays a key part in all of this, and part of that means also, I crudely putting it again, that we don't just stick education in Black History Month, and we don't just have a diverse programming in the smaller studios and we throw it onto the main stage. Peter, do you have a thought here in terms of education and its part?
Well, yeah, I think it's education all the year round, and not just for new audiences, for existing audiences, and when we reframe a production, having enough support and padding around that allows people to self-educate and feel empowered themselves as audience members to really feel that they are part of this action.
We're coming to the end very soon, and I think it's fair to say, judging by what you've all said, is that the tighter we cling on to the tradition, the more we're kind of robbing people one of the most powerful art forms and being connected to the relevance of this powerful art form. So before we end, I'd like to ask you all what you see, what you think success would look like, and I'll start with Rachel.
Oh, that's a really good question. Success to me will look like, I'll do it from a producing perspective. It looks like creating space, stepping back and listening and letting the work happen with artists that you trust. And and believing in that. It looks like having faith in your audience, which kind of relates to what we were just saying, and actually trusting that they might go on a journey you're not expecting them to, and they might be happy to take more risks than you're expecting. I think success looks like allyship from my point of view, and like just as a building, really connecting that thread through, you know, every single person in here, and yeah, everyone being on the same team.
Thank you.
That's all quite broad, sorry.
It's heartfelt. Larry.
Success. I think success is creating whichever institution it is, creating an environment that diversity doesn't need to be talked about. It is just the norm. It is just something that people are in the room, different voices, different ideas, different histories and experiences are in the room. So you never have a perspective that is somewhat short-sighted. It is inclusive because the makeup of the people in the room are always going to be looking more globally, is going to be thinking more inclusively. So when you program something, it may happen just because of the nature, the best people in the room that are on the stage are all Black, or it could happen that it's all white or all Asian, but it's the thinking that we put something together. We are creating a space that always we're going to be thoughtful and really reaching out to our community to make sure that everyone's represented. And if you have that type of system set up, that your season should be such that people will want to come and they know what they're going to get. They feel comfortable, and it begins to build an expectation that you have a different viewpoint. As you said before, Bria, I think you said Romeo and Juliet that they're doing. You expect to see something that you've never seen before. You're not bothered by the fact that Romeo is from Japan and Juliet is from, I don't know, India. I don't know. I mean, it's just a normality that no one in the audience blinks an eye because that's just the norm. I believe that's what success is, that we take away this conversation and that we don't have to have it anymore. We're not there yet, but this is what, maybe it's a lofty goal, but I think this is what success is for me.
Sounds like a place called Nirvana. I'm glad we're having this conversation because we get to talk to you. Very briefly, we are running out of time, but I would like to hear the thoughts of Wabriya and Peter. Wabriya first.
Yeah, I feel like I've got a bit of a nodding dog neck ache.
All of that.
I agree. All of that. And just for me, I think two more things is actually the performers feeling like they belong in that space, feeling supported enough that they can take ownership and stand for their talent and what they can do. And also, I'd like to see just the artists that are from the global majority taking care of one another as well. Because as part of being within an institution that is predominantly white, there tends to be a bit of it's almost like, oh, there's another one. Oh, well, and that comes from something, that comes from history, and that needs attending to too, or naming if it comes up, right? So I think the care of that. And I think one last thing is thinking about the terms we use. I use global majority instead of ethnic minority or non-white or people of color, because actually it reframes and gets people thinking about, well, oh, global majority with the majority not being white, actually thinking about the globe. So it's things like that. And if you've got your audiences coming in and that's the type of framework that they're encountering, then they've got to think as well. So yeah, I think so.
Thank you. Peter, can you briefly conclude your success?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. A fearlessness in approach to action, real action, but also banishing any preconceptions for people coming into this space, into opera, that difference will anyway hold them back.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we have come to the end of the evening. It has been a truly insightful conversation. Clearly, in the room where it happens, with great people and people that passionately believe that this art form is for everybody and can be for everyone. So I hope everyone watching has had something that they find thought-provoking, insightful, and that we can all take away and make it a better place. Thank you all very much for joining us. Good evening.